It's interesting because giving this message on Easter, I was reminded of other Easter services I've attended at different churches. I used to travel, and so I would go to different churches wherever I was. And most of the services I attended at some point, or sometimes often during the message, the minister would say, "He is risen." And then the congregation would echo, "He is risen indeed." And I never quite understood what that was supposed to mean for me. Like, how was that related to me and my own spiritual progression? And briefly, I think if anybody has been raised with the tradition of Easter, people know that Jesus was crucified, and then 2 days after his death, the entrance to the tomb, the stone was rolled away, and his body was gone. And then Jesus, or the spirit of Jesus, appeared and basically said, "Because this happened to me, you," meaning humanity, "are saved from your sins." And I never quite understood that, nor did I understand how that was related to Easter eggs and chocolate and bunny rabbits. So I'm going to see if I can um, explain to you what I understand Easter means. And I think to understand that story of Jesus's death and resurrection, we need to understand about the birth of Jesus. Because to understand anything in the present, we need to know its origins. I mean, isn't that why people go to ancestry.com or they get their DNA tested? Because they believe if they can understand where they came from, what their roots are, then they can understand better who they are and maybe even why they're here. So I'm going to do a Cliff Notes version of the Bible, a speed reading version of the Bible, to see if I can help us all understand this. So if we want to know why we're here and what this lesson of Jesus's resurrection is all about, we need to know where we came from. And in the beginning of the Bible, Genesis 1, the first chapter of Genesis, God says, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness," which means that at our conception as spiritual beings, we were made from God, or the Creator, to be like God, which means, from my understanding, that we're all essentially divine and we all have the ability to be creators. Now, that doesn't mean that we are God, but it means that we are God-like. We have God-like potential. When we fast forward to Genesis 3, interestingly, although people sometimes talk about being born in sin, it doesn't say that anywhere in the Bible. In Genesis 3, that's the story where the woman sees a fruit that looks good, and it also never says it's an apple, it just says a fruit. You know, we don't know what it was. Maybe it was an avocado or a pomegranate or something. But anyway, this fruit was from the tree of knowledge. Sometimes it's called the tree of good and evil. She saw that it looked good. It says in the Bible, when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. So eating this fruit symbolically means that we tasted knowledge and the desire for wisdom and saw that it was good. And then once they ate it, it says the eyes of both of them were open and they realized they were naked. So I don't think this means that literally we were naked. I think the nakedness is referring to being without experience. So if you think about a baby, when a baby is born, the baby is born naked and without experience. It has all of the potential to be a full-grown adult, but it's all potential. And that's how I understand this spiritual origin, is that we were conceived with this idea or potential to be divine, to be like our Creator, with no experience, with the desire for wisdom. And so then how are we going to gain the wisdom? So in the Bible, After the woman eats the fruit and gives it to her husband, the Lord God said, "The man now has become like one of us, knowing good and evil." So, how I understand that is that once we tasted this fruit, this knowledge, and the desire for wisdom, that we had the responsibility as we're gaining experience to make choices about discerning what is good or what is evil. Or another way of describing it is what is in alignment with universal law or what is out of alignment with universal law. And, sometimes people, when they're making choices and they realize they make a mistake, someone trying to comfort them will say, it's all good. But I don't really think that's true. All choices are not good. All choices don't lead us in the right direction. Some choices lead us in the wrong direction. And that's part of our learning is to discern what the difference is. So, as spiritual beings in this human body, our human experience involves making discerning choices about what is going to bring us in harmony with this divine essence or what is going to move us out of harmony. So, as I understand it, that's the seed idea or the origin of our existence. And if we fast forward through the Old Testament, which uh, obviously we can't do in 20 minutes, how I understand the Old Testament is that it's very much like what happens when a baby, physical baby, is growing in a womb. That you have the conception of the child and then the development of the body that is going to enable this spiritual being or child to live in existence. There's a time of development. And that's what all of the Old Testament describes, is developing this creation that we are to become. And then we get to the New Testament and the birth of Jesus. And if you're familiar with the story of Christmas, which describes the birth of Jesus, it says that Mary is with child from the Holy Spirit, meaning that there is this spiritual being that is going to be born, and that it took place to fulfill what the Lord said through the prophet. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. So Jesus, symbolically, people have different beliefs about if Jesus was a real person or a mythological figure. And I don't think it really matters in order for us to understand this story of the resurrection, whether we believe that Jesus was a real live human being or a symbol. What Jesus exemplifies or symbolizes, and the stories that we learn about Jesus, is an example of what it means to be a human being with this essence that God is within us, that we each, as human beings, have a divine essence. There is a God particle, sometimes people call it a God potential within us. And then all of our life experiences are to learn this discernment about how to make right choices so that we can fulfill this God potential. And, even though this is a story in the Christian Bible, all spiritual traditions have some teaching about it. So the Buddhists, for example, have a noble eightfold path. And some of the elements of the Noble Eightfold Path are right thought, right speech, right action, right effort. So it's the same idea that we have choices to make about what is going to be right or productive or in alignment with God. And if you read all of the parables where Jesus is doing his teaching and his preaching, but mostly teaching, there are all kinds of lessons that he teaches, like how to conquer doubt and fear. There are times where the disciples are freaked out about something, and he says, do not fear. How to have a still mind. In the metaphysical community, we talk about meditation and how important it is. And there are times in the Bible where Jesus is meditating, like in the Garden of Gethsemane. There's the time when the disciples are in the boat and there's a storm that comes up and they're all freaked out. And he puts out his hand and he stops the wind and he calms the water and says, "Do not fear." And think about how that relates to our own minds. You know, if there's a time when you're worried or anxious about anything, it is kind of like your mind is in a storm. And by practicing concentration and meditation, you get to calm your mind so that you can think clearly, you can receive whatever wisdom is going to help you. And so it is very much like that, putting out a hand and saying, stop, stop all this craziness, stop all this busyness, and have a still mind. Jesus gives us lots of examples of compassion and forgiveness and love. And one of his teachings is to love your enemies, that, it's not that hard to love your friends and to love your family, but it's when you love your enemies that you really understand love. And I think a lot of us have lessons that come up with that, where, whether it's an actual enemy who's trying to hurt you or an enemy in terms of having a disagreement with someone, really learning how to love someone that you're at odds with is a way to grow in love and to grow in understanding. So all of these life lessons, we each have our own life lessons. Some of them are similar, some of them are different. But we go through life, we have this human body, we have all of these lessons. And just because we have the opportunity to learn, it doesn't mean that we learn it. That's where we need to make choices to be able to progress. And when we have accomplished the lessons, then we graduate. And, similar to going through school, if you don't learn something, you have to repeat the grade or you have to repeat the class. And that's how I understand karma, that if I don't learn something with this person over here, even if I end the relationship with them, lo and behold, I oftentimes get in a relationship with someone else where there's the same kind of conflict. Why is that? It's not because these people are out to get me. It's because I have some lesson that I need to learn. And that's how and why, consciously or unconsciously, I repeat the same kinds of lessons. When I learn the lesson, then I get to graduate. And that's how I understand this story of Easter, that Jesus, through all of his trials and tribulations, all of his situations with people, all of his own practice, all of his own teaching, that he accomplished all of his lessons in the earth plane and was able to graduate, meaning he didn't need a human body anymore. And that's why symbolically, after he dies, the body disappears. There's no more need for him to have this body. So then, why doesn't he just die and move on? Why does he come back and appear to Mary and to the disciples? Well, I think this is very similar to a lesson in the Buddhist tradition, where the Buddhists believe that each person, each being, has their own individual progression, their own individual lessons, but that no one individual can evolve or move on until all of humanity evolves. So they teach that there are bodhisattvas, and a bodhisattva is an enlightened being, someone who has completed all of their spiritual lessons, who comes back in human form to be a teacher and a guide and to aid other people so then they can progress also. And that might seem like kind of an esoteric concept, but I don't really think it is. If you think about all of the people in your life who, through their example or through their words or both, have taught you and aided you, and maybe you're not so aware of the ways that you have aided other people, I think that is an important element in our human experience. Sometimes I hear people talk about Jesus and the resurrection like this was something unique to him, but that's not what Jesus taught. Jesus said, he didn't say, I'm the only one who can do this. And he never said, Jesus didn't form a religion. He was a teacher, and his followers are the ones that formed the religion. What Jesus said is, all these things I do, you can do and more. So he showed us and he gave us an example and he taught us how to forgive, how to accept, how to be a force for healing, how to care for other people, how to include all kinds of people. And so if we think about our own life and our own existence, I think what's important is to determine how we can realize this God potential that we have. Because it's not automatic. We don't automatically evolve. We need to put forth effort. We need to discern. We need to choose in any situation, is this going to lead me closer to my divine potential or is it going to lead me away? And so this doesn't seem so abstract. I just want to give an example that happened recently in my life. It was kind of actually mind-boggling for me. I ran into someone who had been a student of mine. I was a teacher of metaphysics for decades, and I have a part-time job, and this woman walked into the store who had been a very young woman when she was my student. She was in her early 20s, 21, 22. And when we ran into each other the other day, 20 years later, she told me that there was something that happened in our relationship as teacher and student that changed her life. And I didn't even remember this happening, but it was a transformational experience for her. So she told me just a couple of weeks ago that at this young age of 21 or 22, there were a lot of things that she had a lot of shame about. And she told me something that at the time she was very ashamed about, and she was afraid to tell me because it was such a heavy burden on her. And she said, you just listened to me. I could feel that you still loved me. You didn't turn away from me. And it was the first time in my life that I had ever had anybody do that, where I felt completely loved and accepted, even when I was telling you this thing that I was so ashamed of. And it almost brought me to tears because, this was 20 years ago, and it had such an impact on her life. Now she's a counselor and she works with troubled kids. And she said that that was part of inspiring her to want to have that kind of position so that she could help other people. And the reason that I am telling you this is because, as I said, I don't even remember the situation. I certainly remembered her, and I remembered really appreciating teaching her. But through my own practice of listening, my own practice of love, my own practice of acceptance, it not only helped her, but it also gave her an example of how she could do that for others. And that's what I offer to you on this Easter, is to look at your life as being an opportunity to grow and develop wisdom, to make discerning choices about what is right and good and wholesome and in alignment with the Creator, and every day to either visualize what you want to learn or give or develop, or if you have situations that maybe you didn't plan for, to look to what is the learning for me here? Maybe I don't like this situation, but what opportunity is it giving me? Maybe it's giving me an opportunity to be compassionate. Maybe it's giving me an opportunity to be forgiving. Maybe it's giving me an opportunity to love my enemies. Whatever it is, use this human experience and this physical body to learn the lessons, because I believe that's why we're here. And then where that leads us is into our own resurrection, being freed from feeling trapped by this physical body, being trapped by this physical experience, and looking at the amazing freedom that we have to make choices, because it is up to us to make choices in our human experience to align with what we might consider to be the divine potential or the divine will. And through doing that, then we are an example of how we can help others to do the same.